But without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Joseph Sparling, who is the chair of the Canadian Association of Postdoctoral Scholars, and he flew all the way from Calgary to be with us today. And I'm very happy that at the end of the day, the snow and the weather and the planes and you know, the aviation didn't cross completely his path. It crossed a little bit. He was supposed to arrive a little earlier, but he's here. And I'm very excited for him to speak to you for the next couple of minutes. I met Joe a month, 2 months ago in Canada at their annual meeting of, which is a very similar association to the NPA. So CAPS is basically the representation of the postdoctoral scholars in Canada in a little bit smaller scale, but still it is up there. And we wanted to really bring someone from Canada and just to strengthen the EURAXESS North America initiative, that we are not only here for the US-based scientists, but also for the Canadian-based scientists, researchers, and innovators. Although we do a lot more events in America, and I wish we could do a little more in Canada, but if we cannot, at least we bring you over here to talk to us. So, Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vicki. Great to see you again. I don't know how I feel about having to follow the Jemmy panel. That was pretty motivating and pretty exciting. And also, you know, being the guy who's keeping you from lunch. So, you know, we'll try and make sure this stays on time. You'll yell at me if I go too long. Yeah. Fantastic. So, hi. I'm Joe. So the topic I'll be talking to you about today is reviewing the international research landscape in Canada, insights and issues. And I guess somewhere on here it should have said postdoctoral, because that's obviously what I'm going to focus on. So, is there a way I'm supposed to point this? I'm hearing a little ding noise, but nothing's happening. I think I was pointing it the wrong way. There we go. Yeah, I got it. Most people from Canada are a lot smarter than me, so don't let that throw you off. Okay, well, as Vicki explained, CAPS is kind of like the NPA for Canadian postdocs or postdocs working in Canada. We do our best to try to represent Canadians who have left Canada as well. It's tough to keep contact with those folks, but I think we're starting to gain enough momentum that people are aware of us before they leave the country, which is nice. The executive is all volunteers, all current and former Canadian postdocs. And when I say Canadian, I mean people that are from wherever in the world. If they trained or worked in Canada, then they can, if they stay, they can be on our exec as well. And what we do? Well, we basically connect postdocs to promote a supportive national community, or to do our best to do so. Support postdocs by sharing information and resources. And we also collect data and track outcomes for Canadian postdocs. So we try to provide a national voice and sort of get consensus on major issues, obviously, and also advocate for evidence-based policy development and improvement. And how do we do all that stuff? Well, lots of different ways. First and foremost would be our website, which is, I have a screenshot thereof up in the right. And basically this is any post that we do, any surveys, all reports, everything like that gets posted on the website. We share jobs, we share all kinds of resources. And this is a constant sort of work in progress, much like what the Jemmy folks were saying about what they'll end up setting up. So always trying to improve this and share more information, and obviously actually coming to this meeting and meeting Vicki, one of the key things that I was amazed by was how much support is provided for people coming to Europe to do research, to take postdoctoral positions. So this was fantastic to me, and I haven't got it up yet, but we're definitely going to have all kinds of links to you folks to make sure that Canadians who go over to Europe actually know where to get this information. We're also all over social media, of course, and we have our own mailing list. And we started part of sort of a mailing list called the National Postdoc Registry. So what we've done is basically force anyone who wants to become a member of CAPS, and that's free, they can sign up, but we force them to give us information, and we force them to go onto this list called the National Postdoc Registry. And basically, it's a tool that we're going to use in the future, since we just launched this the last 6 months, I believe, to keep track of postdocs. Where do they end up after they're done their postdoc? Do we still have an email address? It's one of the things is trying to make sure we can maintain that contact so that we can do the long-term sort of outcome tracking, right? Because this is something that we've traditionally had a really hard time with. Not just at the institutional level, even in Canada, they struggle with this, but for us to try to do it nationally, we figured it's easier to just get people to sort of sign up on their own. We also run a forum, so basically the postdocs can have open access to each other. You have to be a currently registered postdoc basically to stay on that list, so you have to, but you have the ability then to ask a whole group of hundreds or, well, I think we're up to about 600 people on that list, so, and hopefully that'll keep growing. And they can just ask each other questions, so it provides, an obvious sort of platform for support. And we run national surveys, and this, I mentioned earlier, trying to advocate, we like to do this based on evidence for obvious reasons. So that's one of the primary ways that we get our evidence is to actually run national surveys, and we get quite a good return, actually. The last one we had a couple thousand. And obviously we do policy reports and whatnot. So I'm going to show you a little bit of data from our most recent national survey, actually. The one we held in 2016. And I will give the caveat to this that I tried to filter the data for European only analysis, but unfortunately I didn't give myself enough time to actually do that properly. So while I say that to you now, I'm going to promise that at some point in the future we'll actually do some of the filtering like that and get a bunch of this data that's more specific to European postdocs who are working in Canada. So just really broadly, I'm not going to go through all the details here. A couple of key points. Is there a pointer on here? Hey, there we go. The average age of postdocs in Canada is about 34. On this survey, we had 2,100 participants. And you can see that we've got about, according to the respondents, about 57% were Canadian, and 13% permanent residents, and 29% were on work permits. And we actually you can see we've done a lot better over the years at improving the number of Canadians working abroad that are giving us feedback. So we were pretty happy about that. Hopefully it'll keep going up. A couple of quick points, and I think this is common for postdocs in a lot of different regions of the world. I feel like European nations tend to do a lot better, this is my impression anyway, in terms of providing social security and benefits and stuff like that to their postdocs. This is a big issue in Canada, and primarily for employment insurance, where are we? And the Canada Pension Plan. Even if you're Canadian, you don't get access to these things as a postdoc, or you haven't for a long time. And this is starting to change, but just to give you an idea, there's a lot of issues in terms of like lax benefits for health and dental, pension, security, all this kind of stuff. So this is one of the issues we focus on a lot in CAPS, and something we're starting to make some more headway with. One thing I will point out, though, is that obviously this isn't going to be the same for just international postdocs necessarily. In particular, for basic provincial health care, I think the 13% here that don't have access to it are probably all international postdocs, because in many of the provinces you have to live there physically for a year before you can even get access to that. So this is something that is on our radar. We're developing some health insurance options for postdocs working in Canada in general, and one of the things I think we're planning to include is actually some kind of emergency insurance or something along those lines for international postdocs as well. Top benefits desired. Employment insurance and CPP rank high, so Social Security is an issue here. And what's interesting is I have actually filtered this for international postdocs previously, and we got the same result. The international postdocs also recognized that this was important. part of the reason for that is that most of the international postdocs who come to Canada actually, I think it's about 70% want to stay or they're thinking of staying. So they recognize that if they do that, that's important. On the flip side of that, even if you plan on going back to Europe, many of the countries, I think probably all of them in the European Union, have social security agreements with Canada. So if you got access to CPP, you can arrange to pay into your own pension scheme back home while you're in Canada working, as opposed to having to pay into CPP. Employment status, I already talked about this a little bit. I'm going to dazzle you with the number of postdocs we have, which we think is about 10,000, but nobody really counts these things properly. So we're estimating now that about 30% of the postdocs in Canada are employees, and that was based on our 2016 survey data. But I actually have to say that I think this has increased substantially. We've had a number of institutions where the postdocs have unionized. We've had, in the province of Alberta, I was part of the group responsible for getting them to actually put into provincial legislation that postdocs are employees. But unfortunately, this only applies to the internally funded postdocs, so the postdocs who get paid by internal, like grants held at the university, right? So that is the biggest group of postdocs. I think it's over double the number that we have that are actually externally funded. So what this means is we now have this situation where those people are getting access to Social Security, and people that have external funding actually aren't. So we're in the process through CAPS of talking to some of the funding agencies to try to sort of fix this. Whether or not that happens is a long-term question. But I thought I would inform you that right now, I think that some people coming over with their own funding, they might be a little put off by that because they may see that they don't have access to those Social Security sort of protections and benefits that internally funded postdocs do. I think we're all aware of some of the stuff I'm going to talk about here, so I'll go over it quickly. Tenured track positions, this is by far the number one thing that most postdocs, when they start off, if you ask them, what are your career aspirations, they'll say that. They'll say, oh yeah, tenure track faculty. And what I really want you to pay attention to here is the drop-off. And this tells me, this is current career goals are in blue, and the original career goals are in red, original being when you started your postdoc. And it's basically like dropped in half. And this tells me that we're actually, well, A, that people are aware of the situation in terms of job opportunity for faculty members, especially in Canada and in general, because this is not just in Canada, right? This is people looking, thinking about their future, could be anywhere in the globe. And it also tells me that we've done a good job of informing people of this, because it helps to keep people aware that they have to be looking at other options, right? It's worse if you get, everybody goes 5 years through their postdoc and then all of a sudden they aren't a postdoc and they have nothing. So it's better if they're attuned to this early on. And this shows me that, you know, that at least people are, whether it's just from our efforts or they actually start paying attention to the job market. Career goals, why do they change? I mentioned job market a couple times. Number one, unfavorable job market. I think this is particularly, people tend to answer this question from the reference of faculty position availability, primarily. But there is also perception that PhD level training in Canada, especially, that there aren't that many jobs that require that level of training. So I think it's reflective of that as well. So this is a problem that obviously our country as a whole needs to engage in a little more. And we've had some very promising sort of movements in that direction with the appointments of a new Minister of Science and a Chief Science Advisor and all this kind of stuff. So fingers crossed that will pan out. But you can see that it is the major cause of career goal change as people go through their training. Excuse me. Sorry, getting really bad dry mouth. How am I doing for time? Okay. And this is something I was going to try to sell to you guys, but I think it's a given. We need more professional development, particularly for people transitioning out of academia. I think this is true across the board, not just in Canada. One of the things that sort of lets you know how big of a problem that is in Canada is the fact that 43% of the postdocs who responded to our survey said they basically had no exposure whatsoever to non-academic careers for people with PhDs. So this is something obviously we need to work on. And this is just preparedness for non-academic careers. And the general story is people don't feel prepared. And you know, if 47% of you have no exposure to that, that's not really surprising. Encouragement from supervisors is an issue. We don't find that there's a huge amount of it. Most of the time it's sort of more apathy that people get in terms of encouragement for going to career and professional development events. This is why we actually at CAPS are big fans of the idea that there should be, at each institution, there should be professional career counseling available. Because generally speaking, your PI is probably not the best person to give you advice about leaving academia. So hearing about things like mentoring networks that are available and the whole GEMI idea, this is something else that I think we could really benefit from being involved in for obvious reasons. I won't even bother. Hours worked. Postdocs everywhere work a lot, and they spend most of their time doing research. That's all this slide tells you. The reason I bring it up, though, is that I think it contributes to the next slide, which is talking about mental health issues. And some of these numbers are really high, especially if you look at things like depression and anxiety and panic attacks and that. 30% is well over double the national sort of average in Canada for people to report depression or anxiety lasting at least a month is what this question asked. So I think the overworked, concern about careers, all these kinds of things, sort of a typical package to make people have a bit of anxiety and depression. I'm going to jump back and show you this now. So of the permanent residents and people on a work permit, that accounted for about 42% of our postdocs. Now these numbers, they're changed dramatically depending on who you talk to. We saw some U15 data recently that suggested, U15 being the 15 biggest research institutions in Canada. The recent data I saw from them suggested that 75% of their postdocs were actually international, whether they be landed immigrants or on work permits. And this, I will point out to you, about a quarter of the postdocs that did respond to our survey were born outside of Canada, about a quarter of the postdocs that were born outside of Canada actually came from Europe. So there's a couple here, France, got Germany, Italy, Spain. I have no idea if the UK gets included with you guys anymore. No? Have they Brexited yet? Anyway. And I'm sure that there's more in this other 1% category here. So as I mentioned earlier, my future plan now is to get some data together specific for you folks by going through and actually filtering all the answers we got. And I suspect we'll see some differences because I will say in terms of talking to international postdocs in Canada, one of the big things I see is a distinction between European postdocs. Quite often they come and they're like, yeah, Canada's nice, but I'm going home, right? And then we have postdocs from other parts of the world, pretty much every other part of the world, where they tend to come and they are the ones who say, oh, I'm staying here for sure. And they usually, a lot of times, I think it depends on how strong of a research environment you have back home and social support, all these kinds of things, right? But I do think that looking at that, I also hear from the European postdocs when they come in that they're usually the ones who are the most shocked by the fact that they don't have access to benefits, that they just come in assuming that, oh, I'm a postdoc, I'll have access to all these benefits like I would back home. And then they get there and they go, what? I don't have mat leave? Really? So this is why it's not just for Canadians that we work on those other issues. I think it's standard to me. If you are coming from a European country, you just expect that. And I think you should. And so I want Canada to do that. So we're getting there. This is the issues that postdocs, international postdocs in particular, face. And most of this is, I would say, it's unique to people that come into a country, but At the same time, all this does is sort of feed into the issues that postdocs already face, right, in terms of lacking benefits and all these other issues in Canada. It exacerbates those things if you're also dealing with, you know, being in a new country and moving, and if you have extra expenses bringing in a spouse and all that kind of stuff. Some of the bigger issues too, visa work permit issues. Postdocs in Canada quite often, traditionally they've been categorized as trainees. So you're not employees, you're not students, but you're trainees. What this usually means is you don't have access to any of the support that you get as a student, and you don't have access to any support that you would get as an employee. So you sit in this nice limbo area. And this gives us an opportunity or a responsibility as the national postdoctoral organization in Canada to make sure that we do our best to actually provide those kinds of support. Yeah, that looks like a lot of words now that I see it. So at the top, I'm just talking about the typical things that postdocs need, right? You know, income sure is always an issue, benefits, protections, better job market, career development, professional development sort of support, and mental health and well-being is becoming a bigger issue based largely on some of the data I showed you earlier. And yeah, I already said that. These issues are exacerbated sometimes, and sometimes there's also unique issues that arise because of mobility, right? So basically, international postdocs, whether they're European or from anywhere else in the world, coming into Canada, they need the same things that all the postdocs already there need, and then they also have those, a few additional issues with help with visas and whatnot, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. And this is just a slide stating the obvious, which most of my slides did now that I mention it. So what can CAPS do to improve this? And this is something that I think since our involvement with Vicky, meeting her and hearing about all the great stuff that's available to postdocs coming in from Europe, this has been something that's been on the executive's mind. So we need to improve our support that we offer, information and resources for Canadians going to Europe. But we also need to start providing more information and resources for not just Europeans, but all international postdocs coming into Canada. And part of that is connecting with groups like EURAXESS, CAA, all these fantastic groups that are supporting those communities, those diaspora, those little niches. If we bring them all together, then everybody gets covered. So that's kind of where we're headed right now. And I think you guys are all doing fantastic work in terms of providing that kind of community support, because I feel like that's another aspect. We can have a nice supportive community in Canada, but you know, if you're coming from somewhere else, it's nice sometimes to have people that are also from somewhere else to talk to. And the big thing, I think, in terms of sharing information and all this kind of stuff is just to get people to actually be engaged, right? Contact CAPS, share your stuff with us. And that's what I would kind of end with is this. If you want to be more involved, you can sign up as an affiliate of CAPS, which, don't worry, it doesn't cost anything. It's on our membership page, and it basically just allows, or it gives you access to our mailing list, and it also lets you just send us stuff to post, and EURAXESS is already on there with us, and we've been sharing their stuff for a while. So I invite you all to do that. You can also sign up as an individual member. We have an adjunct thing. You don't even have to be Canadian. So, but the big thing to me is being able to reach those groups. So if you can share this information, contact us, become affiliates, or even just contact me via email, that would be fantastic, and we can help spread the word about all these great initiatives. Thanks for your time, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you. I went way too long, so I don't know if we have time for questions. I planned that on purpose. I'm kidding.
Thank you for coming and actually open an interesting door. I did not know you existed as a CAPS, the organization. I wonder where is the American one, right? So it would be good to hear more about them, that I'll be looking for them outside. I have a question. So I am from Portugal. I also am part of the Portuguese American Postgraduate Society. And as similar to what we've been talking this morning, it is an organization for North America. It's United States and Canada. We have a lot of Portuguese in Canada. A lot of our members are in several of cities, major cities, and they are postdoctoral.
Mhm.
I did not know that they had those, that you had such organized surveys that you could actually bring numbers to it. I was wondering if I could keep in touch with you through my organization so we could learn a little bit about how you reach out to your members to come up with those numbers. Because I can see ourselves as a Portuguese embracing so many different cities among North America territory that if we show these to more political, the political side of things, we could actually get much more of their involvement. And I don't mean money all the time, but that would help too.
Yeah.
But advocate. So it was not really a question, but really, I think many of us that are more on the nonprofit, volunteer side of things, very ignorant on the bureaucracy, how to deal with those things, we could help our members much more if we learn and if we are aware that your type of organization exists and the way you work. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome, and yes, do, please, contact me. We have I created a bunch of new executives last year, and one of them was a VC of data management. So we have our official survey data gets analyzed by a company, and we pay them a bunch of money so people know we're not making up the numbers. But we can also offer to have people go through and do specific analysis just for an individual country. We do this actually at the institutional level. I'd have to talk to the executive. We were charging $300 to cover the cost of the person who ran that analysis for us, and we didn't make any money off of it. But what we might do, it's depending on how much interest we get. It could be something that the new VC that I just mentioned, the data management person, works on. So yeah, keep in touch, and if anybody else is interested in that kind of analysis, let me know, and we could possibly set something up.
Hi, I'm Julie Schwartz, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Postdoc Association here in the United States. So come see me if you have any questions about the U.S. program. I'm curious, since we're talking postdocs, in Canada, do you have postdoctoral offices and leadership in your universities like we have here?
Yes. It varies considerably. So it depends on how many postdocs an institution has, obviously. But I've even encountered some where there's quite a few postdocs, and sometimes what they'll do is instead of having a dedicated office for postdocs, what they'll have them do is run it through the graduate studies kind of faculty. So I can't remember the percentages, but it's basically split between those two sort of setups. And then we have another setup, which is where they don't have any official anything. And those schools or universities are usually ones we get a lot of complaints about from postdocs in terms of policies, obviously. When they don't exist, it's a problem.
Our policy survey is about to come out in January in Sigma Size magazine. So it'll be interesting to see the comparison between the two countries, and because we ask a lot of similar questions, although most of our postdocs are up under the university umbrellas, and we have 80,000 members, so it's a substantial, different kind of structure. I also, if anyone is interested, love to talk to you. We have a National Postdoc Association conference that happens in April, and this year is going to Cleveland. I would love CAPS to be there.
Cool. We'll have to talk. So we actually just recently, it's good to meet you, Julie, in person. We had a bit of an exchange, and we have a little MOU, so we'll be sharing information about not just the meeting, but also MPA membership drives and all that kind of stuff as well. And I encourage everybody to do that kind of stuff for each other. This is how we get to the point where people actually do know we all exist, right?
Hi, my name is George Vulgaris from the University of South Carolina and National Science Foundation. I would like to comment to you that I enjoy that you show some hard data, because this is really what you need before you put a proposal, because generalities are great, but backing it up with data is great. My specific question is, do you have any data about the time that people spend as a postdoc? Because to me the duration of their postdoc appointment is very well associated to career sometimes.
Yes, we do. I didn't include it today, but it's, I believe the average that we had was like 3 years. And in Canada, the typical sort of maximum is 5, which I think is quite common. But it's interesting, we see a lot of turnover in earlier years when postdocs are more informed, I think, about issues in terms of job market and how, especially lately, there's a lot of information coming out about the financial impact of doing that extra training and stuff. So we're starting to see more people do shorter postdocs. But on the flip side, we still, if you get to 5 years and you still have active funding, they don't usually kick you out. So I still know people that have gone 7 years. And I do think that sometimes, you know, it's staying that long, you're not doing yourselves favors. And this gets back to the whole idea of having dedicated career counseling. Because I hate to say it, but sometimes postdocs are stubborn. And we need someone who actually says to us, you're in your 4th year and you only have 1 publication from your postdoc. Go. So it's, you know, it's tough, but everybody has 5 publications that are almost out, right? Perpetually. So yeah, I do think that has a big effect. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe, very much for your presentation and for all your questions.